My name is Russ Gauthier. I am the art director at Perception in New York City, and today we're going to be discussing blockbuster FUI techniques in Cinema 4D. Now, I'm going to put a pin in that FUI term. We'll come back to that here in a little bit, but first I kind of want to discuss a little bit about who Perception is and what we do. So, Perception was started 15 years ago by Danny Gonzalez and Jeremy Lasky. And our focus is UI and concept design for feature films and future technologies. So what that means is for feature films, we've worked on had the opportunity to work on some amazing movies. We have held a long-standing relationship with Marvel, going all the way back to before even the Iron Man movie came out. So we've had this amazing opportunity to work on movies like Iron Man 2 and The Avengers and Captain America: Winter Soldier and Thor and RoboCop and so many different movies. It's too many to name. So I'm just going to go ahead and let the feature film montage sort of speak for itself. I'll run this guy for you here real quick so you can see what we do. Thanks. So that's a little bit about the feature film side of things. Now, everybody goes to watch movies, and everybody loves a good superhero movie, including some of the biggest tech companies in the world. So that's the other side of what Perception does, is working with sort of the greatest minds in technology, sort of emerging technologies. They come to us for all kinds of insane future concepts, concept cars and crazy interactive future technologies and all sorts of stuff. So one of my favorite things that we got a chance to do was work with Ford on the 2017 concept car, the Ford GT, which is this insane hypercar, really cool. A great honor to work with the folks at Ford on that one. We partnered with Microsoft in the early days of the HoloLens and sort of figuring out how you could actually use interactive elements in a virtual environment using something like the HoloLens as your visualization device. more recently worked with a company called Fove. They're a VR tech company that has this really interesting hardware model where you can get some really cool interactions. So we partnered with them and worked with them on developing some interactive concepts for their unique technology. And then recently worked with Harman on a mid-air haptics project, sort of doing some interface design for technologies that could appear in automobiles and all over the place that actually give you this sense that something is in your hand, even though it's just sort of hovering in space. Really cool technology. So we get to work with some amazing people on the technology side and some amazing people on the film side. We're all just humbled and honored that we get an opportunity to work with such fantastic people. But going back to the film side, early last year, Marvel Studios approached us about helping them kind of put a flag in the ground. They had just started a kind of new phase for the company. They were bigger than ever, growing insanely fast, and they wanted a new logo. They wanted to kind of take the existing logo and modify it and really make it their own. And then they wanted a new animation to go in front of all of their movies. So we were incredibly honored to have them come and approach us with such a monumental task. They're all incredibly dedicated, personally and professionally, to the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, and we at Perception are, of course, huge fans of everything that they do. So it was an incredible honor, but no small task, to say the least. So when they approached us, we had sort of come up with this idea of telling the story, not only of Marvel Studios, but actually how movies get made, specifically some of these superhero movies. So we knew we wanted to start with comics. So obviously Marvel is deeply steeped in comic book history. Amazing superheroes and characters and story arcs that span decades. Really cool. So we wanted to start with the comics to show sort of the ground level of how everything got built up. Next, we move into script elements. So from the comics, you get screenwriters developing scripts for movies and how to adapt some of those stories to something that would be sort of compressible into like a 2-hour chunk, instead of taking 10 years to tell a story, take 2 hours. Moving on to concept art. Marvel employs some of the most talented concept artists out there. This one is Captain America by the amazing Ryan Meinerding. He is their head of visual development and is deeply involved in every single project that they do, sort of figuring out how to translate something that was originally drawn on paper into something that you can put on the screen and and make real. And then, of course, into the movies themselves. So now we've gone from concept art to the actual movies. We're into all of their characters. We affectionately named this section of the logo The Vault, which we will discuss in detail in a little bit. Next, more movies, lots and lots of movies. So here we're getting, we're seeing the breadth of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe all in one screen. It's just visual insanity, really cool. And then out to the Marvel Studios logo. So this is the new logo reveal that we designed for them. And I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the process montage for Marvel Studios, this project we did. So let's jump back here to the vault. Like I said, we were going to discuss the vault. The vault is sort of the second half of that entire animation after we get past concept art and scripts and all that. Now we're into the movies, which is amazing, but posed some real serious challenges for us on the development side, sort of figuring out how to wrangle all of these movies. We had over 180 clips from movies, and these are not small clips. These are gigantic EXR sequences. Definitely hard to wrangle that amount of information. And then we wanted to make sure that we get all of that into Cinema 4D so that we could get reflections and GI and refractions and light play and glows and all this fun stuff that you see in the final. But getting there posed some challenges. So we had started with something like this, which is our Marvel Studios logo, and I don't have studios in here, but I just have Marvel. And we knew we wanted to get clips on every single visible wall in this thing. And it's a ton of different walls and different clips, and they're all edited differently. They all need color correction. They all need to fade between clips, so each wall has multiple clips. We wanted to make sure that we didn't do something weird like have two people facing each other, or like, have a big blank space, and make sure that we get everything positioned just right, because the characters are gold for Marvel Studios. That is their biggest thing. So what we wanted to do was make sure that we developed a technique that allowed us to not only position and edit these clips together, but also kind of prepare for the future in case they came back and wanted to add more clips or change things out. So we needed something that was very flexible as well. And that's kind of where Cinema 4D really helped us out. So there's a few ways that we could have done, and we looked at a couple of different ways. So one way would have been to go through and sort of create a texture per face. So in After Effects, we could have made, sort of calculated how many faces we had that we needed footage for, go in and make edits per face, and then bring them back in here as individual textures. It has the advantage of allowing us some of the After Effects workflow flexibility and color correction and crossfading and everything, but it didn't really allow us to work in context, and that was really important for us. Like I said, make sure that everything is framed correctly and we're not cutting off anybody's head or anything like that. So the other idea we had was UV unwrapping. We could take this entire inner area of Marvel here, this sort of interior surface, UV unwrap the whole thing into a really long strip, and that would allow us to kind of edit everything together and crossfade and see kind of where the characters fall. But it didn't really allow us to work with the logo itself. So like, we could work within context of the clips, but we couldn't really work within the context of the logo reveal. So what we ended up doing was actually outputting all of these individual faces as mattes, and then also as 3D position data, so that we could actually get the clips positioned in After Effects. So I'm going to show you guys how we manage that. So what I've got here is the inside of the Marvel Studios logo, and if I select all of these elements in here, you can see as I pull out, they all have the anchor point right in the middle of the footage. So I've got all of my individual components, I've got all of their 3D data already set up here, which we can easily export from Cinema right into After Effects using an external compositing tag, which I'll show you here in a moment. The other thing we needed was mattes for each of these things, so that we don't have footage like crossing over and like sticking up where it doesn't belong. We needed to matte that footage into each of those components. So what we ended up doing here, so in order to generate those mattes, let's start with this guy here. Let's look at this particular piece. In order to generate a matte in Cinema 4D that you can output, use a thing called an object buffer. And in order to create an object buffer, you need a compositing tag. So under here, Cinema 4D tags, and grab our compositing tag, and we come under this tab here called object buffer, and we enable an object buffer. And every single one of these, you can assign a specific number. So you can say, this is object buffer number 1, the next one over is object buffer number 2, and those are going to render out as 2 separate mats. So you get a mat for each of those, each individual unique number. The next thing you need to do is come up here into your render settings, and under multipass, add an object buffer output. I'm going to turn this on. And this number needs to correspond to this number down here. So you have your output and you have your tag, and they need to have the same number. The problem we had is there's a bunch of faces. There's like 38 faces in here. And this process is fantastic for a few things, but when you have that many and you're doing iterations and all kinds of things, this is huge potential for human error. So what we ended up doing was just writing a little script that kind of does this for us. I'm going to go ahead and open that up and show you guys that here. I just called it Object Buffer Maker, and it's this little Python script that we'll make available for everybody to download through Cineversity. And you just paste that guy in here and select all of the faces that you want to select. Here, I'm going to actually delete this old object buffer. We don't need that guy. So we select all of the faces that we want to have individual object buffers for. And then I just simply go up here to make me some buffers and click this guy. And you can see now I've got that external compositing tag on all of those faces that I've selected. What's more is as you go through here, each one of these, you can see this number change. Each one of these now has its own iterative object buffer ID. So it's gone through and it said, okay, there's 38 items, and I'm going to give each one a sequentially larger object buffer ID. So that's great. Doesn't do a whole lot of good unless you also have all that stuff in your output window. So we scripted that in as well. So here in object buffers, now we've got a named object buffer for each individual face that I have. Each of those has its corresponding object buffer ID. And then, of course, when you come in here, user-defined layer name, you can click on that, and now all of your outputs are going to have the same name as your object buffer IDs right in here. So you're not going to end up with object buffer 1, you're going to end up with mtop object buffer, which is fantastically useful for actually putting this thing together. So after you render that out here, I'm going to just render a single frame so you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about here. This will go pretty quickly. We'll just give that a render, and we'll fit that to the screen so we can all see it. And we'll do that again. Alrighty. So if I go up under here, under layers, now you can see I've got all of these object buffers like that. So I can actually, if I come down here to one of these that has information, you can see what this is outputting is one object buffer per face, which is exactly what we need. That's going to give us our mats. We're going to be able to use the external compositing tag to get our 3D information back into After Effects, and then we're going to be able to position everything exactly how we want, mat it, and do all our editing and composition right there. So back in After Effects, let's go ahead and open up our project. Go ahead and grab this guy here. Right, let that open up. Okay, so back in After Effects, this is actually what we get right here out of Cinema 4D. I don't have the entire scene, but I do have this this chunk right here. So what you can see is we've got a mat and we've got a null object for every single thing. So then we use that with our EXR sequences that we got from Marvel, and we put every single face together. Ends up looking like this. So here we have Asgard and we have Falcon, and they are right here. So we've got Loki back here in the corner, and you can see if I zoom out a little bit, he is matted against the object buffer there, so that's the object buffer we got, and we've matted him. He is now in 3D space, We have all of our camera data, so our camera move is exactly the same here in After Effects as it was in Cinema 4D, which is absolutely essential for the next step, which is to actually render this thing out and then reproject it back into Cinema 4D. Because what we need now that we have all our footage in place, we have everything color corrected and it's looking good, it needs to get back into Cinema 4D so that we can cast GI and we can get reflections and refractions and all the things that make it look finished and really pretty. So back in Cinema 4D, I'm going to go ahead and open up our scene here. This is a blank scene. So this scene doesn't have anything on the walls at all at the moment. Now what you get out of After Effects when you get done rendering this thing is a PNG sequence, and I'll just sort of step through this so you guys can see it. We'll get a few of these. Go down a little further. There we go. So what we get is a PNG sequence where the camera move is actually baked in to the texture. So we've got a transparent background. We have our footage matted on each of our walls, and our camera move is actually baked in. It is the same exact camera move from Cinema 4D that piped into After Effects, and we can use that to our advantage to reproject that right now. So I've got my image sequence loaded up here, and I'm going to drop that right onto my Marvel Studios null object here, and it looks completely broken and wrong, doesn't look right. That's because we're still doing UV mapping. What we need to do is camera mapping, and what that's going to do is essentially treat the camera as a projector. And since we are projecting a texture that has the camera move baked into it, it's going to stick really nicely right on our walls. So under UV mapping, now we're going to go down here to camera mapping, and it looks totally broken because we haven't defined our camera yet. So we need to take our camera here and drop it right into the camera field. Almost there. We need to set this from standard 4:3 to HDTV. And now we have our characters mapped onto the walls using the same camera move all the way through. We're able to kind of reproject all of this stuff right onto the walls. So this allows us to get all of these different passes out. So we've got reflections and global illumination and material color and all that stuff. I'll give it a quick render. These frames are pretty long to render, but just to kind of show you guys exactly what you're getting out of it. We get, of course, our image, and then this floor texture. It has a lot of like really rich detail and depth and multiple layers in it. We get all of our reflections and everything that we can pipe right back into After Effects and composite with our EXRs. So after rendering that entire image sequence out, back in After Effects, we now end up with something like this. After sort of combining those layers, do a little compositing and blending on those guys, we end up with something that looks like this, where we have our lovely reflections and refractions and GI cast on the floor. You can see our various layers. We've got our GI pass, and we've got our reflection pass, and we've got this refraction pass that's giving us that nice kind of striations in the floor, give it a lot of extra texture. So the next thing to do is just to combine this with our EXRs, and we end up with something that doesn't look like that if you have those layers soloed. There we go. Now we have our EXR sequences, and we have GI and reflections being cast from those EXR sequences right from Cinema. Combine them in After Effects, add a couple of compositing tricks on top of that, and it's done. I'll go ahead and show you guys what the finished product looked like. All right, so jumping back here to my presentation, we're going to not only switch gears, but switch entire universes and talk about Batman vs. Superman and talk about some FUI. So we were approached by Warner Brothers to do some UI design for the Batcave and for Lex Luthor's personal operating system, which was really cool for the movie Batman vs. Superman. And we had over 100 shots in the movie. Those were sort of our primary focuses, and I'm going to show you guys some of that stuff. But before we get into it, for the uninitiated, FUI it stands for Futuristic User Interface. So you have UI, which is your regular user interface, and then FUI, which is Future User Interface, or Fantasy User Interface. You can use that, or Fake User Interface, or you essentially insert any F word you want, it becomes FUI. But what FUI really does is FUI helps tell a story. And that's sort of the most important element of it. It's not just pretty pictures. It actually helps the audience understand a little bit about what's going on without having the actors having to explain every single thing that they're doing, all of their actions. You can get a really fast read, a really quick idea in front of an audience, and they can just get it with a graphic. And if we can make it look pretty in the meantime, then so much the better. So we're going to focus specifically on this shot, this sort of kryptonite scan. And this is a moment in the movie when Bruce Wayne is sitting in the Batcave and he's hacking Lex Luthor's personal computer. And he's pulling up files and he's looking at different things. And he notices this folder called Xenomaterials, and it's full of crazy materials from other planets and all sorts of weird stuff. So show you guys some of that stuff. So this is a shot from the movie. This is where he is going through the folders and he's pulled open the Xenomaterials folder, and we get our sort of kryptonite and then all kinds of other weird stuff. We don't even know where those are coming from. Crazy Xenomaterial things. And we're going to focus specifically on this guy. And what we see here, if I can get this guy to loop. There we go. Now we can watch this thing. So this is sort of our kryptonite visualization. This comes up sort of full screen in the movie and then transitions to an actual shot of the real kryptonite rock. And you can see there's many things going on here. There's multiple layers of scanning and radiation and sort of this surface topology thing, which is really cool. So we are going to discuss specifically this kind of pulse that runs through the kryptonite. Sort of got this constant pulse running through it. Some of these other layers, we actually have a tutorial series up on Cineversity right now called The Perception Guide to FUI, where I go in and show you guys exactly how I made this sort of topographic visualization that makes it feel kind of alien and crazy. But today we're going to discuss the pulse. So we'll jump right into Cinema 4D and start making some things. I'm going to start a new project. I'm just going to make this from scratch so you guys can see sort of exactly how I ended up building this. And in order to do this, I need an object. So I'm just going to dive right into the object browser here. We're going to look for a 3D object. And I'm going to use my pepper model. And we're going to scale him up because right now he's super tiny. I'm going to go 50. We're going to make him a nice big pepper right here. And get him sort of positioned correctly. And let's rotate this so we get this sort of 3/4 perspective on our pepper. And before I go any further, I like this camera angle, so I'm going to make a camera to lock that in. And then to make sure I don't screw it up and move the camera unexpectedly, which is going to completely ruin everything, I'm going to drop on a protection tag, which is something that is like the first thing I do when I'm coming up with these things. Like put a camera in place and put a protection tag on it so I don't move it around. So we've got our pepper here, which is lovely pepper. And we're just going to go ahead and kick out a quick render of this. We're going to make this a 16-bit TIFF. We're going to add a alpha channel. We don't have any sounds. We're going to unclick that. And go, just going to make a folder on the desktop here. Pepper. And we're going to call this pepper, if I can spell pepper right, pepper color. There we are. And we're going to render it out. Lovely. There's our pepper. Fantastic. Back in After Effects, let's just go ahead and start a new project file. Bring our pepper in from the desktop. Pepper color. There we go. We want to make sure we have an alpha channel. Alpha channel is absolutely essential for this particular technique. So we make sure we bring that in with an alpha channel. And there's our pepper. Glorious. So let's go on to the next step here. So I'm going to hide my pepper. And I'm going to duplicate that layer. And for this next step, I actually don't need any textures on it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these lovely textures. I'm just going to get a gray pepper. I'm going to create a new material right here and drop that on the null object so that material gets applied to everything. Everything under the null object now gets that material applied to it. We want to give that material a gradient, which I'm going to do in the luminance channel. So right now it is just all white. I'm going to come in here, add a simple gradient, which doesn't look quite right because it's currently set to UV mapping. What I want to do is set that to flat mapping. I use flat mapping all the time. It is a super handy way of getting different graphics applied to things really, really quickly. I love flat mapping. So I'm going to get this gradient positioned a little nicer. Scoot this in here. Oh, there we go. I'm going to look at it from side view. I'm going to rotate that. Nope, not like that. I'm going to rotate that guy 90 degrees. And I want to make sure that my texture is fitting end to end and that we're not trimming off anything. So I get a nice smooth gradient across the entire surface. I'm just going to position that so that we get that here. Just like that. Great. So now we have a nice smooth gradient applied to my pepper. Now I'm going to go ahead and render this out. This part is absolutely essential to render in at least 16-bit depth. Certainly you can go 32, but I would not go 8-bit. You're going to get banding on any kind of gradient. So we want to make sure that we stay 16-bit, and alpha channel is also absolutely essential for using this technique. So we're going to call this pepper grad for gradient. And we're going to go ahead and give them a render. So now we have a gradient pepper. I'm going to come right back into After Effects, import that guy, pepper grad. There you go. Make sure it comes in with an alpha channel. I'll show you what happens if you don't have an alpha channel, just in case. But first we're going to set it up the right way. So we want to drop that right on top, and you can see that fits directly on top of my pepper, just like it should. Now we're going to use an absolutely ancient After Effects plugin that usually goes largely ignored because it's kind of crazy, but we're gonna use it today, and that is Colorama. If you've ever played with Colorama, it generates things like this, which is weird rainbow pepper. I don't know. It's not really what we want. What we want is we want a grayscale. So under Output Cycle, there are these user preset palettes here. So I want ramp gray, and what that's going to give me is just the same gradient ramp I had before. Not terribly exciting, except now I can go in here and change this color wheel to sort of control where that gradient is going to fall across my pepper. So I'm going to take this white handle, I'm going to drag it down here to about 5 o'clock, and I'm going to add another handle. I'm going to make this a black handle. And I'm going to kind of scoot that really close to the white handle here. So what I end up with is like a really sharp edge, like a white edge that falls off right to black really quickly. And then on the back side of that, this long, soft gradient. And before I go any further, I want to make sure to change my After Effects color bit depth to 16-bit as well, so we don't get any banding at all. Get some nice smooth gradients. Cool. This itself isn't terribly exciting, but when you come into the input phase and you start playing with the phase shift, then you start getting something that kind of looks like it's pulsing across the surface of our pepper. And all we've done is taken a still gradient from Cinema 4D and brought it into After Effects, where we have like total control over timing and color and everything, which is pretty cool. So what I could do now, what I want this to do is sort of continually cycle through the pepper, just constantly be scanning the pepper in a regular interval. And to do that, I could set a keyframe, and I could, maybe like use a loop out function, or I could like manually set all my keyframes if I wanted to change the positions. But what I'm going to do is something a little bit different, show you guys a technique that I use for sort of continually looping animations, something really powerful. So just a little sidebar, back in Cinema 4D, I really like explaining this in Cinema 4D. It's a really nice way to visualize before we get into writing a really tiny expression in After Effects. So in order to visualize this, I need a cube. Make a cube here. And we're going to use just a little bit of Espresso, so I need an Espresso tag on it. There we go. And we want to bring our cube over here, kind of expand this a little bit, and I want to expose the position Y input because I want it to move up and down. The next thing we need is a time node. Drop in our time node here, because that's going to be the thing that's sort of constantly feeding it whatever the current time of the playhead is. And that's going to allow us to do the movement that we want. And the last thing we need is a range mapper node, which is my absolute favorite node in all of Espresso. I use it all the time for all kinds of things. If you're familiar with the linear expression in After Effects, it's very similar to that, but even more powerful, allows you to make really nice curves and all kinds of stuff. But today we're going to use a part of the range mapper that at least for me, had remained largely a mystery until I did a little research on it, and that is this kind of modulo function here. So if I go ahead and hit play now, we're probably not going to see a whole lot because it's not moving very far. It's moving a little bit, but not moving very much. So what I'm going to do is change this output upper in my range mapper. I'm going to change that from 1, I'm going to make it 100 so that we really see this thing moving, really see exactly what it's doing here. So I hit play, and it just sort of floats off the top of the screen. It's only looping because it hits the end of the 90 frame timeline and then jumps back to frame 0. Not quite what we want to do. So what we want to do is turn on this modulo switch right here. And what that's going to do is now give us a continually looping animation. The reason that does that, the reason that even works at all is modulo returns the remainder of a divide operation, which, your second grade math teacher probably explained, when you first started getting into division, before you even knew what a decimal was, you're dealing with whole numbers. So if you imagine dividing 7 by 2, you get 3 with a remainder of 1. And that 1 is what modulo is returning for you. The reason that works so nicely when paired with time is that time is kind of giving you a decimal value, a floating point value from 0 to 1 every second. So when you go, at the moment we're at 30 frames a second, so when you're at frame 0, your time is going to be 0. When you're at frame 30, your time is actually going to be 1. So you're at 1 second. When you're at frame 45, you're going to increase your decimal place like that. So you're going to get like 1.25, 1.5, 1.7. But what the modulo function does, when you do a modulo of 1, all it's going to do is just give you the decimal. It's going to remove that integer off the front and just give you whatever that decimal value is, just looping over and over again. So again, if I hit play, we get this sort of looping animation. If I want that to go faster, all I have to do is change this input upper number. So I can change that to, say, 0.25. Now it's going to go 4 times as fast. It's going to jump and get crazy. Likewise, if I wanted to go slower, I could set that to like 1.5. Now it's going to go 1.5 times the speed, like that, which is cool. I'm going to do something like that in After Effects, but real quick, wanted to show you why it's so powerful in Cinema 4D. So you can actually shape animations using this spline curve down here. So at the moment, it just goes up and then it jumps back to the bottom, goes up and jumps back to the bottom. I actually want it to go up and then down and up and then down again. So we can do that right here by drawing this sort of shape curve where at the beginning it's 0 and at the end it's 0 and in the middle it's 1. So it's now when I hit the play button, tell it to go, it's going to ease up and ease down, so ease up and ease down. So it's just going through that, cycling over and over again. We could make that look like it's bouncing by just changing the shape of these endpoints. If I drag these up like that, now it's going to look like it hits the ground and it bounces back up over and over again. No keyframes, really easy to just change the shape of this curve and get it to do all kinds of crazy things. We end up using this a lot for sort of gauges and all kinds of things. We want to have the needle bounce around, but you don't want to set a ton of keyframes for that. And this is just really easily art directable method of creating motion with no keyframes at all. The other really nice thing about this is that you can literally use it in just about any kind of animation software. So we're going to use this exact same technique back in After Effects. Now that we kind of explained it, I'm going to create a expression right here on my phase shift, and I'm going to write out in parentheses time modulo, which is the % sign, time modulo 1, and because we've got degrees up here in our phase shift, I'm going to multiply that times 360. So we're going to get, for every second, it's going to make one 360-degree rotation through our input phase. So I'm going to hit play here, and it's going backwards. So I need that to be negative 360 degrees. I want it to go this way. And there we go. Now we've got this sort of constant pulse going through our gradient. Now if we set this to something like add mode, now we have a pulse going across the surface of our pepper. It is mapped very nicely, and we can go back into Cinema and change that gradient however we want, and it's going to update really, really easily right here in After Effects for us. This is cool, but I kind of want to get this thing feeling a little bit more volumetric. Right now it's just on the front sides, just on the surface. I kind of want it to feel like it's scanning the entire volume of the pepper. So in order to do that, I need to get a gradient for the back side. Now there's a few different ways you could go about doing this. You could actually just duplicate your pepper, and you could delete all the front faces and just leave the back faces. But it's kind of destructive method of doing things. I like to do things a little more non-destructively. So I'm going to go right back into our gradient material. I'm going to turn on an alpha channel. And in our alpha channel, we're going to use normal direction. It's under Effects, Normal Direction. So what that's going to do, normal direction is going to give you, if I go in here, you can see it's just two colors. There's not much to it. It's going to give you a white value for normals that are facing the camera and a black value for normals that are facing away from the camera. And what we want to do is actually reverse that. Since this is in an alpha channel, what that's going to do is it's going to remove visibility on any faces that are facing the camera and keep the visibility on the faces facing the other direction. So we're going to come in here. I'm going to make this black, and we're going to make color 2 white, just like that. And in the viewport, we don't see a lot of change, but if I give this a quick render, now you can see we've got something that kind of looks like maybe the back side of the pepper. I'm going to give this a quick render, Peppergrad back, and render that out. Lovely. So back in After Effects, and bring that guy in, just like that. Awesome. So I'm just going to duplicate this layer and alt drag my Peppergrad back right onto that. And that way it has all the same effects and it has the same timing and everything kind of built into it. I don't have to rebuild that stuff. So now when I hit play, now we can actually see it's actually pulsing through the backside of that. I'm going to change a couple opacity values here to kind of heighten that effect a little bit, because you don't want everything right now is at 100%. I'm going to reduce the backside of that to say 30%, and the front side is a little hot, so we're going to maybe take that to like 60%. Yeah, maybe we go 25 back. Cool. So now we've got something that feels like it's kind of scanning the entire volume of the pepper. And all we have is just 3 still images out of Cinema 4D. So really easy, really flexible method of getting this kind of pulse. So I kind of want a sharper edge here. If I zoom in on this guy, you can see that gradient is nice and soft, but I kind of want a hot leading edge on both sides of that. So I'm going to duplicate my 2 layers here. I'm just going to isolate my front layer and go back into Colorama, go to my output cycle. And in order to make a sharp edge, what I'm going to do is actually drag this white, see if I can grab that, and drag it just as close as I can to that leading black handle, and then drag this one so that we get a nice hard edge right up front there. I'm going to copy this effect, and I'm just going to paste it on the back one here so that it just inherits the same exact properties and looks the same. Now we've got a pulse that it's this hard edge pulse that goes right up front. Now when I turn everything back on, now you can really see it's got that like hot leading edge that really kind of draws your eye to where that is in space. That's cool, but let's add a little bit of a texture to that as well, so it's not just the gradient. So we're going to duplicate my pepper again, and I'm going to delete this guy. We're going to make a brand new material like that. And for this one, I'm going to drop it right on the null object. I'm going to go back to my luminance channel. And under surfaces, what we want is the tiles effect, like that. And everybody knows that hexagons are the shape of the future, so we're going to make it a hexagon shader. And we're going to make it just grayscale. Keep it really easy, grayscale. If I hit randomize color, nope. Let's make those white and make those dark. There we go. Now we've got some kind of randomized color, except everything is like it's UV mapped, but it's not UV mapped evenly. So we have, sort of large chunky hexagons, and we have some nice tighter hexagons. I kind of want all those to be more or less the same size. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to take my material and I'm going to put it onto the individual components. So just control dragging that onto my various pieces so that I can control the UV mapping scale per object. So the body is sort of our major issue. It's a little big. Let's take that to like 30% the size. It's going to tile really nicely because it's a procedural texture and it's all UV'd, so it's gonna wrap pretty well. That's not quite right. Let's try 20%. It's getting a little better, maybe 15, just a little more. There we go. It's feeling a little closer, and I think that stem is also a little big, so let's maybe take that to like 75%, maybe 60. There we go. So that feels a little bit more even. It's not perfect, but it's good enough for what we're doing here. So what I want to do is call this pepper texture. There we go. Give that a quick render. Sweet. And back in After Effects, of course, we bring in our pepper texture with an alpha channel. And what I want to do is use these layers as a luma mat for that guy. So I'm going to duplicate this layer, hide that one, bring in our pepper texture just like this, and set them as a luma mat. Cool. Now I've got that texture pulsing through as well, which is fun. And there we go. We've got that added in there to complete the look of our pepper texture. And I'm going to show you guys the montage for this guy. Well, thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Hit us up on all of your favorite social media applications. Again, I'll throw that up here so you guys can see that. And thank you so much.